think we've certainly chosen wisely in our leader for these sessions. Denny Petrillo is married to the former Kathy Roberts. They've been married since January of 1978. They have 3 children, Lance, Brett, Laura. Is it 6 grandchildren now? His 6 grandchildren now. He served as the president of the Bear Valley Bible Institute since 2004. He's been a full-time instructor since 1985. He's preached in Mississippi, Arkansas, Nebraska, and Colorado. He's taught numerous classes for the World Video Bible School. My mom has watched every one of them and said she was excited to know that Denny was going to be here. He's authored several books and commentaries. He graduated from Bear Valley School of Preaching, which is now Bear Valley Bible Institute. He received an AA degree in Bible from York College in York, Nebraska, a BA in Bible and Biblical Languages from Harding University, an MA in Old and New Testaments, Harding Graduate School of Religion, and a PhD in Religious Education, the University of Nebraska. He was on the staff at York College while I was there, and I had him for a couple of classes. He was also a soccer coach, and he's a nice guy, but he could yell at you. I will just tell you that. But it's a pleasure to have him here. I consider him a mentor, and I'm looking forward to the things that he has to say, and I think we will all benefit from it. We are recording these, we're videoing these, and then at a later date, we will upload them to YouTube in a playlist, so all of the sessions, hopefully, will be set up that way so we can all go back and take a look at them. Brother Denny.
Do I need to tell my Daryl as a soccer player stories and relate some of those things? No, we don't need. Yeah, let's. Oh, yeah, those are good memories, though, and that does show you how far back we go, back to the York College days, and appreciate very much being here with you. Been looking forward to this. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here, but also to be able to talk about something that is a very important topic in the church today, in the world today. I want to begin, though, by telling a story that is especially for the ladies that are here today, because the focus is going to be mainly talking to male leadership in the church, but I do not want to leave the impression that there are not leadership roles for the women in the church. Not roles that are going to assume positions like elders and those who are going to preach and lead and worship and things like that. That's not part of God's plan. But to say that is not to say that women are not a part of God's plan in leadership. We're talking in this session about vision. And all need to have vision. And the one that I want to talk about that really reminds me of vision is my mom. My father was not a Christian. And as a matter of fact, he was antagonistic to Christianity. My grandfather on my mom's side was an elder in the South Denver Church of Christ. And so my mom was brought up in the church. And although she had left the church for a while, had returned, married my dad, who was not a Christian and was antagonistic, as I mentioned, toward Christianity. So we've got 4 kids. I've got 2 older brothers and an older sister. So yes, I'm the baby of the family of 4 kids. And my mom established a principle of Christianity in the home that I look back now and I'm full of admiration and full of awe on what she was able to accomplish in the most difficult of situations. We did not miss. We did not miss Sunday morning, Bible class or worship. We did not miss Sunday night. We did not miss Wednesday night. And it was a given that we were always going to go to worship. And I remember as a kid doing what kids do, and that is, Mom, can we stay home with Dad? And Mom would say no, and my dad would say, come on, Neva, that was my mom's name. Why don't y'all just stay home with me tonight? We can watch a movie, we can pop some popcorn, and come on, Mom, let's do that. And she said, no, we're going. And your dad is willing, is invited to come with us if he wants to, but we're going. And we went, and he stayed home. And that same process happened again and again. And you know the whole story about the dripping eventually wears away the stone. But it didn't wear away that stone that I refer to as my mom. And what's especially interesting is yesterday was her birthday. She would have been 98. She passed away 6 years ago. But September 9th is her birthday, and she, like I say, she would have been 98. And I remember my mom with great fondness because of the example, the leadership that she had in the home, the vision that she had in the home. Well, I remember as I was growing older and I became more and more interested in becoming a preacher, that I was interested in the soul of my dad. And I would ask him if he would study the Bible with me, and it was consistently no, not interested. And I would give it some time and ask again, and it was the same answer. And another 6-7 months, ask again, and it was the same answer. And then the doctor told him that he's got some serious heart problems, going to need open heart surgery, and probably not going to survive the surgery. Well, my dad had the surgery. He did survive. And I remember in the hospital room, in the recovery room, asking him one more time, expecting the same answer that I always heard the times before. Dad, would you be interested in studying the Bible with me? And shame on me for anticipating the no answer, because this time it wasn't a no answer. It was, I think I'd like to do that. So I had the blessing of studying the Bible with my dad, and then had the blessing of immersing my dad into Christ when he was 57 years old. And so as a Christian, my dad became just like Mom. My mom got up in the morning and would pray at the kitchen table. She would read her Bible for about 45 minutes every morning at the kitchen table. And so now that Dad was a Christian, he joined her in prayer, joined her in reading the Bible for 45 minutes. And as I mentioned early on, never missed. My dad was in very poor health, but he never missed. And it amazes me today at the excuses that people offer for not attending worship. Because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of my dad, who was clearly not feeling well, but still came all the time. As a matter of fact, some of the older members at Bear Valley remember my dad with carting up his oxygen tank and serving the communion trays, going up and down the aisle doing that. And what a vivid memory of my dad, and an inspiration to a lot of people, including me. But the point that we're making here comes back to Mom. Comes back to the influence that Mom had. So 4 kids, my oldest brother, my second oldest brother, deacons in the church, They fill in, preach. They are faithful, active in the various churches. They've both moved to Arizona. My sister married a preacher, and so was a preacher's wife until my brother-in-law passed away of brain cancer about 7 years ago. So then you've got me, that full-time preacher, Bible teacher in the Bible Institute. And all four of us kids, and we were talking yesterday among ourselves, remembering Mom with great fondness and love. But the impact that a woman has on the church is something that is very hard to quantify. And I think that we are remiss to not point out the significance that women have on the church, in the home, and the way that they provide leadership in a divine context in the home and in the various women's ministries in the church. So ladies, thank you for what you do. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your determination to be difference makers in God's church. Because I know that if it were not for my mom, I wouldn't be the kind of person I am and where I am today without her influence, especially growing up in an environment that was very much anti-Christian with my dad and the way he was early on. When we think about the situation that we are in today, there have been so many studies, and I'm not going to overwhelm you with lots of different studies, but I want to point this one out. You'll see the title probably, if you can read that. It says, "Conservative Churches Grew Fastest in the 1990s," the report says. All right, it's a 2002 report, and so I went back and I looked at the 10-year renewal. They do these surveys, and well, in 2012, the statistics were even more in favor of conservative churches. And then we go another 10 years to 2022. So here we are, very contemporary with the information, and it is still about the same, although it has subsided ever so slightly. But here's my point, and the point of this study, and that is that socially conservative churches that demand high commitment from their members grow fastest. We are in the right place. We have the right approach to God's Word. And there are people that are looking for churches that stand for something, that are looking for churches that know what they believe, that are focused upon biblical teaching, rather than the watered down, I think, she thinks, everybody thinks mentality that we see so frequently in denominational churches today. So I was doing a seminar in Mississippi, and the advertisement for the seminar was such that talked about being a Bible-focused seminar. And there was a man that attended one night of the seminar, and he said, I drive by this church building on my way to work and drive by it again on my way home every single day, and have done that for the last 25 years. He said it wasn't until the advertisement that was put in the paper and then my attending this meeting that I finally learned that this church stands for something. And I thought how sad it is that here is someone that's lived in that community. It's a small community of about 5,000 people. He's lived in that community. He's driven by that church every single day, virtually in his life, but never knew that the church stood for something, and that's really what he was looking for the whole time. When we think about vision for the church, God has already provided the most important aspect of what we're talking about in the vision for the church. God has provided the vision. And now it's up to us to assume that vision for ourselves and to connect with the plan of God. The article goes on to say in the New York Times, I was astounded to see that by and large, the growing churches and those that we ordinarily call conservative, said Ken Satchgren, director of Glen Mary Research Center and a professor, chairman of the department. He says, and when I looked at those that were declining, most were moderate or liberal churches. And the more liberal the denomination, by most people's definition, the more they were losing. When we look at statistics across what we would call denominational Christianity, we see the hemorrhaging of membership by the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands. One particular article I have in my file talks about the Presbyterian Church having lost 6 million members in the last 30 years. Well, what's happened to the Presbyterian Church? Well, lots of different things, and we're not trying to all finger one particular thing. But one thing that has happened is there's been a significant shift in doctrine, in focus, in the way that they conduct themselves. Back in the years that I preached, we had a campaign that was a very successful campaign that was entitled, What to Do When Your Church Leaves You. Well, what do you do when your church leaves you? They're no longer the church that you remember. The thing that should be the hallmark and the distinctive mark of the churches of Christ is our approach to this book. And our approach to the Word of God is that which should provide a consistency, an understanding where we are all on the same page, pulling the same direction as far as organization, as far as worship and leadership and all of those things. Now you might say, all right, with those studies, what about the churches of Christ? Because they did talk about particular denominations. Well, according to 1990, there were 13,097 churches, membership of 1.6 million plus. And then you go forward 10 years, we dropped some to 13,027, and with a membership of 1,645,000. So that's a minus 70 churches, a minus of 35,000 adherents, and a negative growth rate of 2.1%. So we should be among those that are seeing the growth, but did not see the growth. We didn't see radical decline that was found in some of the places, but there was radical decline. There was decline within the Lord's church. Part of our problem, and I hope that in the sessions that we go through together today, will help us kind of reconnect and re-energize ourselves into having God's vision for the church be our vision. And what God sees for this church to be what you see for this church. I guarantee you that I would not have agreed to come out here if there wasn't the hope that we could together connect and re-energize and determine that we're going to move forward with the Lord's work in this place. The Bible tells a number of stories about men that were impacted by the presence of God. In Isaiah chapter 6, you'll remember that Isaiah is before the throne of God, and you see the cherub there, and the cherub are saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." Well, Isaiah is one that says, "Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." But because of God's forgiving him, Isaiah has then the vision, I want to serve. And God asks the question, who's going to go? And Isaiah makes the famous statement, here am I, send me. And of course he does go. In the book of Ezekiel, in chapter 1, God gives Ezekiel one of the most incredible visions that's described for us in some detail. And in that particular vision, he sees the magnificence of God, the four living creatures, and the throne of God, the rainbow above God, fire coming forth from the throne of God. And it is so impactful that Ezekiel falls down on his face before this great vision of God. And you ask the question, what is God doing? Why is he giving Ezekiel this particular vision? And the answer is, Ezekiel's going to get to work. And when you get to work, you need to be able to remember the God that you're serving. If we are visionaries, and we're training ourselves to be visionaries in God's plan, we recognize that it's God that we serve. God is the power behind us. Isaiah needed to be reminded of that. Ezekiel needed to be reminded of that. And so it ought not to surprise us that is also true for us. To be reminded that this isn't about me. It's not about you. It's about God. It's about God's plan. It's about God's church that worships and meets in this place. You might remember the story that was told by Ronald Reagan. Giving his inaugural address, he told the story of a World War I soldier by the name of Martin Treptow. Martin was killed while trying to carry an important message between battalions that were under heavy artillery fire. On his body, a diary was found with the section entitled, My Pledge. And in that section, My Pledge, Martin Treptow said these words, America must win this war. Therefore, I work. I will save. I will sacrifice. I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. With that kind of attitude and that kind of determination, it's easy to see why there are those that find success. When we think about his statement, as if the struggle depended on me alone, is really an important thought. What is it that you individually contribute to this church? Now, I've kind of said that in a way that gives a negative vibe to it, and that's not my intention at all. But when we think, we could say answer positively, because you might be one that teaches Bible class. You might be one that is involved in various works of the church, and I commend you and thank you for that. But it might also be true that there are things that are being left undone, are things that are falling to just a few that really should be shared by all. Church growth experts have made a very astonishing and interesting observation, which sometimes is referred to, and I know Daryl is familiar with this, the 80-20 principle. And that is that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the members. You've heard that, right? Well, how fair is that? Well, it's not fair. It's the reality of many churches, and that's not the way God wants it to be. What is needed is an understanding of the motivation that gives impulse to the missionary endeavors and the work that the early church did. R. Pierce Beaver once said, "No vocation will be answered with complete dedication unless there is strong motivation." Why does the lighthouse stand in the midst of the onslaught of the waves? Well, because it has a strong foundation. It is determined that it is going to resist the forces. So also did the early Christians. They might have been ridiculed, arrested, threatened, but they kept on preaching about Jesus. And when they were commanded to refrain from their incessant teaching about Christ, they responded and said, we cannot. We cannot stop speaking what we have seen and heard. So relentlessly, regardless of the cost, they shared the news of salvation in Jesus, both with their neighbors and with people in distant lands. So like an untiring surge, the church spread from Jerusalem to the far reaches of the Roman Empire, while standing firm as a lighthouse in a dark and troubled world. And when we think about God's plan for Bostonia, it's to be a lighthouse, to be salt, to be light, to be an impact, an influence in the world. So we think about this idea of visionaries, and I hope everyone here this morning is thinking about it from that perspective, even though my slides talk about men, but we're talking not just about men. I am focusing more on men, but on everyone. Are people who have come face to face with God. Isaiah did in Isaiah 6. Ezekiel did in Ezekiel chapter 1. They both had visions of God. God revealed to them His power, His greatness, His majesty. And why is it that Isaiah went on to do great work and Ezekiel went on to do great work? It's because of that vision of Himself that God gave to them. We have to come face to face with God. And He reveals Himself to us in the pages of Scripture. And why does He do this? Well, with Ezekiel and Isaiah, they needed to learn that this isn't about them. Not really. The success of the mission is based upon God, and that point alone guarantees success. When leaders choose not to lead, there should be leaders, and in one sense they already are. It's because there is always that doubt, that nagging doubt, that there will not be success. But these men, like Isaiah and Ezekiel and many others, went on to do great work, and that great work was based upon their relationship with God. When you do some introspection and you think about yourself and your own walk with God, have you come face to face with God? Because I guarantee you that when you come face to face with God, there's not going to be some hesitation on service, some reluctance to get involved, some temptation to not come to worship. When we come face to face with God, it changes us. It impacts us. And when we see our God in all of His glory and His attributes, that's what motivates us to get to work and do what needs to be done. But also, visionaries are those who have stood at the foot of the cross. I don't know if you're someone that can kind of transport yourself to another place and another time, but try to do that with me for just a few minutes this morning. Imagine yourself at the foot of the cross. You're looking up at the beaten, bloodied body of Jesus. You can see the agony in His face. You can see the suffering in His eyes. You can see how His body is writhing in pain and gasping for air. Now, as you're looking at that body, you think, He's there because of me. He is there for me. The amazing truth of the cross is that Jesus did what He did so that I might be saved. so that you might be saved. That realization should motivate each one of us. One of my teachers, when I went to Bear Valley years ago, Roy H. Lanier Sr., there might be some here that remember him. He'd say, boys, there's nothing worse than an ingrate. And over the 2 years that I attended Bear Valley, I heard Brother Lanier say those words several times. There's nothing worse than an ingrate. And when it comes to what Jesus has given to me, there's nothing worse than an ingrate that would not want to give back. I don't want the blessing without cost. I hope that you don't either. When we're at the foot of the cross, we see ourselves serving. We see ourselves saying, if he's willing to do that for me, then I'm willing to do what needs to be done for him. And that's what motivates us, because we have stood at the foot of the cross. Visionaries are those who can dream great dreams. Have you ever wondered why God gave us a book like Revelation? In that book, it provides us a glimpse of what is to come. We get to see the last chapter of the book, the end of the story, and it provides us an opportunity to visualize a great throng of people that are surrounding the throne of God, singing praises to his great name. And it encourages us to see ourselves there. I have you? As you read Revelation chapters 4 and 5, and you see the multitude of people that are all praising God and praising the Lamb. Each one has their own story. Each one has their own story of commitment, their own story of sacrifice, their own story of dedication to God. You do. That's why you're there. I do. That's why I'm there. And so we tell the story of the time that I lived in California and the time that there were challenges to my faith and I stood strong. And there were times that the church was under assault and I defended the bride of Christ. Stories of dedication, stories of victory. And we have dreams, great dreams. Now I'm talking about eternity and the dream that we have of being among that great throng on the day of judgment. But now let's back the dream back just a little bit. According to what information I was able to get, this church started sometime in the 1950s. So you're getting close to a 70-year anniversary since this church began. It started small, as many churches do. It started meeting in, I believe it was a home. Somebody had a dream. Maybe several somebodies had a dream for this church. And now the vast majority of those who are here this morning are now the beneficiaries of that dream. We should be dreaming great dreams, dreams of the church growing, serving, impacting the community, the state, the world, that we can be and are going to be difference makers, dreaming on what this can be. We're at Bear Valley facing another anniversary, and the Bear Valley Church of Christ began in 1962. In 1965, the elders made an announcement that they had decided that they were going to start a preacher school. No one there even knew what a preacher school was, but they had a vision that initially was to impact the churches in the north central states that were desperately needing preachers. And so these men, basically there were 3 elders, wanted to do something, to try something that was going to help the church in Colorado and then going north into the Dakotas and Nebraska and Iowa and places like that. So they started preacher school. And the last of those elders they've all passed away now. But I would sit with him and just want him to tell me his stories. His name was Roy Baker. And I said to Roy, did you ever in those days envision the Bible Institute becoming what it is now? And he said, not even in my wildest dreams. I thought that we might be able to help 5 or 6 different churches in the Midwest. And that was really the scope of my dream. So where are we now, getting close to a 60-year anniversary? We have graduated nearly 900 men. There have been over 1,200 who have attended the Bible Institute. And through the providence of God, we started international schools in 1997. And it was purely by accident. We actually were invited to come and to establish a Bible department in a university in the eastern part of the Ukraine, a city by the name of Kramatorsk, Ukraine. And so we made a survey trip over there, and we decided that we would give it a try. And so we established a Bible department there, and it went very well. We converted everyone that was in the Bible department. Every student, we had a cap of 30 students. And so we continued that and baptized more out of the second class, more out of the third class, until we thought we need to start a preacher school, because some of these young men were saying, we'd like to be trained further so we could preach ourselves. So we started a preacher school in Kramatorsk, Ukraine. Then we eventually moved to Gorlivka, Ukraine. And then we moved to Belozerka, Ukraine, just a little bit south of Kyiv. If you watch the news, you've heard the name of all of those cities. All of them have been impacted by the war, and cities have been bombed. Our students have scattered. They're all in different places. But anyway, my point is not to tell the story about what's happening in the Ukraine, but as of today, we now have 57 international preacher training schools. When we were dreaming back in the beginning of the Bible Institute, though we weren't thinking of any international schools, that wasn't even on our horizon at all. 57 preacher schools, and in the last year, there were close to 4,000 people that were baptized just by our students. We keep track of those numbers every year. And we're getting close to another report for 2022. How many gospel meetings, how many Bible studies, how many baptisms? And over the last 5 or 6 years, we're now getting close to 40,000 people that have been baptized into Christ just by our students alone. Would you have ever dreamed of something like that? I wouldn't. And as the president of the Bible Institute, sometimes I'm ashamed of myself, because my dreams are not as big as the God that I serve. And so what is it that holds us back from being all that we can be, doing what we can do? Sometimes it's just not having great dreams. It's not believing in the power of God and thinking that a little church in Denver, Colorado can eventually be impacting 29 countries, 57 preacher training schools, over 1,000 men right now being trained, over 2,000 graduates in the international program. Who would have thought of something like that? Well, to be a visionary, we dream great dreams. And think about this church in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, where most of us will have gone on to our reward. But what is the legacy? What is it that remains? Because like an iceberg, what is seen on the top is small compared to what lies beneath. Are we able to look beyond the surface and see what other great things God can do? You know, when Joseph's brothers were plotting against Joseph, and Joseph arrived at the camp where they were, they said of Joseph, "Here comes the dreamer." Genesis 37 and verse 19. God allowed Joseph to see the great things that were ahead and how he was going to use Joseph to accomplish those great things. So also is it, or should it be, with us. Visionaries are those who are ready to spend and be spent. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus discusses those who are blinded by things like food and clothing and shelter, so that they're not productive for God at all. And then he makes the statement in Matthew 6 and verse 33, "Seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." It's a lesson about priorities. It's a lesson about understanding that we need to connect with God's vision. And when we do that, then that means that there are other concerns that we have, like food, clothing, and shelter, that become secondary, and God says, "I'll cover that part. If you'll put me first, then I'll take care of the other things other concerns that you have in your life." A willingness to spend and be spent, where you can look over your life and say that I'm glad I did what I did, the choices that I made, the service that I gave to the church. Paul says in Romans 1, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed." You see, Paul had already said in the previous verses that I'm going to go do the job. I'm under obligation. I'm going to do the work because I am not ashamed of the gospel. And so whatever it was going to take in order for the gospel to be spread, Paul's basically saying, sign me up. I'm going to do it. We need to have a love for the lost, where we'll go where we need to go, we'll do what we need to do, and we'll be able to say, like Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is come. But I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. And therefore there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord will grant to me, and not only to me, but to all those who have loved his appearing." I'm going to skip through that. Great text in Psalm 40, though, talks about how we don't want to restrain, hide, or conceal the loving kindness, the truth of God from the world. As visionaries, we are those that want to get the message out. And we're visionaries are those that see the big picture. I want to tell the story about a student that actually attended years before Michael did. His name is James Piffner. James was one that was rough around the edges when he came to school, and was one that took some extra effort in working with him, not only in the classroom, but out of the classroom. And we were hard on James. We demanded that he rise to the occasion and do his best work. Why? Because I knew that someday he could be the preacher for my kids and my grandkids. Well, sure enough, James is now the preacher for the Parker Church of Christ in suburb of Denver, and that is where my children and grandchildren go. Seeing the big picture was seeing that this person is going to impact people that I know, people that I love in the future. Visionaries don't just see the church in the short term, but also in the long term. Where will the church be in 20 years? Where will this church be in 20 years and in 50 years and on down the line? We've got to recognize the seriousness of 2 Timothy 4. Jesus is coming. That's a reality that is assured us in the pages of Scripture. And we recognize that Jesus is coming, and he's going to judge those according to their obedience to the gospel. He has fixed a day, Acts 17:30 and 31 says, in which he will judge the world in righteousness. And so visionaries are those who believe that God can use them to further his plan, the truth of the gospel, and the advancement of the kingdom. Are you one of those who believes that God can use you? Are you one of those who can see a role, a place? Talking about men, talking about women. You know, the Bible tells the story about Andrew. Andrew is mentioned 12 times in the New Testament. And most of those times it's in lists. But the Bible says that Andrew brought Peter to Jesus. And Peter is one that's mentioned over 130 times in the New Testament. One of the leaders of the church preached the first gospel sermon in Acts chapter 2. My mom, some would say, didn't make that much of a difference. But I know that she directly impacted 4 people, myself included, to be a part of God's plan. I love this illustration. Maybe you've seen it before. But when we think about obstacles that are before us, somebody has got to try and face the obstacles. And why not you? Visionaries come to terms with their own sinfulness, the scope of God's love. Visionaries develop a deep and abiding love for others and a concern for souls. And visionaries get to work despite their own weaknesses. And that's why we need to capture God's vision and make it our vision for ourselves.